Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, my second favorite of the books. I think it did a really good job of wrapping up the series in a satisfying way, which for a series this long is quite impressive. In adapting this book, the filmmakers decided to split it up into 2 movies, which I definitely think was a smart decision. There was no way the important events in the book could have fit into one movie. That said, I think Part 2 benefited far more from the split than Part 1 did. Deathly Hallows Part 1 covers approximately 2/3 of the book. I think it does a great job with the action sequences and the feeling of dread seeing our heroes on the run or in hiding. Unfortunately, there is one major problem. Because it doesn't adapt a full book, this movie has no clear arc. Each of the other movies clearly had their own arc to go along with the overall story, whereas this one kind of requires you to watch Part 2 as well. There are also some problems that kind of carry over from the other movies that I don't know how much I can blame this one for. In addition to that, this movie does kind of follow up on the precedent that I think was set in Half-Blood Prince of not necessarily knowing who the most important characters are. So much like the last movie cut a lot of Voldemort's past, this one cut a lot of Dumbledore's past, which I think is almost equally as important, and frankly is one of my favorite parts of the book. It makes Dumbledore much more three-dimensional. He wasn't always the wise, kindly, selfless man we knew him as. He was actually very close to becoming a dark wizard himself, and by the time he realized that, it was too late for the people he loved. Now, like in the last video, I'm going to start by going over Dumbledore's past, just as I did with Voldemort's. This time, though, I'm going to kind of go through it quickly and not touch too much on the details until they become important in the book. Unlike in the last book, where we learned about Voldemort's past a bit at a time, in this one we learn about Dumbledore's past from several different perspectives, namely Elphias Doge, Rita Skeeter, and Dumbledore's brother Aberforth. Each of them naturally have their own opinions and biases, and each of them in a way has one piece of the puzzle. In the end, it's Dumbledore himself who provides the full story in that sort of limbo realm. To summarize though, Dumbledore, even at a young age, was unusually gifted and brilliant, and he knew it. He was very ambitious and wanted recognition for his talent, and while he loved his family, he didn't spend much time with them in his quest for glory. His family consisted of his father, Percival, his mother, Kendra, his brother, Aberforth, and his sister, Ariana. One day, Ariana was brutally attacked by a trio of magic-hating Muggle boys, and whatever they did to her damaged her so badly she could no longer control her magic and became volatile. In other words, she became an Obscurial.
It was before wizards went underground, when we were still being hunted by Muggles. Young wizards and witches sometimes tried to suppress their magic to avoid persecution. So instead of learning to harness or to control their powers, they developed what was called an Obscurus.
It's an unstable, uncontrollable dark force that busts out and attacks.
Their father took revenge on the Muggle boys and earned himself a life sentence in Azkaban, and some years later, their mother was accidentally killed when Ariana had one of her explosive episodes. This left Albus, the oldest child, with the responsibility of looking after his younger siblings, something he deeply resented, as it meant he wouldn't be able to pursue his own dreams of personal glory. Then, one day, Albus met a young wizard named Gellert Grindelwald, and the two became fast friends. In fact, Albus harbored secret romantic feelings for Grindelwald. Grindelwald had this grand vision where wizards would rule over the Muggles. Having seen the hatred Muggles had for magic, as well as what they had been doing to each other with all the wars, etc., Grindelwald believed that wizards needed to keep them in line, that wizards should stop hiding their existence, reveal themselves to the Muggles, and rule over them, not just for wizarding freedom, but for the Muggles' own good.
That is the enemy. Their arrogance. Their power lust. Their barbarity. How long will it take before they turn their weapons on us?
Go forth from this place and spread the word.
It is not we who are violent.
After what those three muggles did to his sister, as well as his own desire for personal glory, Albus was deeply captivated by Grindelwald's words and fully on board with his ideals. So rather than looking after his brother and sister, Albus spent almost all of his time with Grindelwald, working on their plans to take over the Muggle world. Then, one day, the two of them were confronted by Aberforth, who was angry with Albus for neglecting his sister, who needed to be cared for. Grindelwald angrily retaliated by torturing Aberforth, and a three-way fight ensued between Grindelwald, Albus, and Aberforth, and in the process, Ariana was accidentally killed. It was only then that Albus saw Grindelwald for what he really was, as well as the depth of his own mistakes. The death of his sister was the thing that finally knocked some sense into him and made him turn his back on Grindelwald, and would forever be the greatest regret of his life.
Not unless you had a brother who died too.
In my case, it was my sister.
Did you love her?
Not as well as I should have done.
Unfortunately, it was too little too late for Aberforth, who angrily cut ties with his brother, understandably so. Grindelwald, meanwhile, proceeded with his plans for Muggle domination on his own, and his reign of terror would last several years. Eventually, it was Dumbledore who finally stopped his old friend after an epic duel, and Grindelwald was locked away in Nurmengard, the prison he himself had built to hold his enemies. So, like I said, that was a relatively quick version. There is more to it than that, though, and I'll go into those details as they come up. As I said, I think cutting this material from the movies was a big mistake. But let's get to where the actual story starts, shall we? The movie starts out with Rufus Scrimgeour talking to the press. Seeing as they never introduced him in the last movie, it does make sense to show this, especially since he'll get only one more scene. It's definitely clear from this that he's a much more forceful and commanding figure than Fudge, and I think Bill Nighy was a solid choice to play him. I just wish we could have seen more of him. The movie then does a pretty cool sort of foreboding montage where we see the Dursleys leaving Privet Drive, I'll talk about this later, Ron silently contemplating the difficult journey ahead of him, and of course Hermione erasing her parents' memories. By the way, hi Lady Stark. This is something that Hermione tells Harry and Ron she did in the book, but I think seeing her do it here was especially effective and heartbreaking, especially when she disappears from all of their picture frames. The one problem is the movie never really explains why she does this. Basically, in order to protect them from Voldemort and the Death Eaters, she's making them forget all about her, as well as their own names, and putting it in their heads to move to Australia. If and when Voldemort is finally defeated, she plans to track them down and undo the enchantment. What makes this moment even more chilling is that there's a very short deleted scene showing Yaxley walking into Hermione's empty house later. Thank God she sent her parents away. So after that montage, we then come to where the book begins, with Snape arriving at the Malfoy Manor for the Death Eater meeting. In the book, he and Yaxley both arrive at the same time. Also interesting to note, in the book, Voldemort has Snape sit directly to his right. He's now Voldemort's right-hand man. So in both versions, Snape informs Voldemort of the date and time that Harry will be moved from the Dursleys and taken to the home of one of the Order members.
It will happen Saturday next, at nightfall.
I've heard differently, my lord. Dawlish the Order has let slip that the Potter boy will not be moved until the 30th of this month, the day before he turns 17.
This is a false trail. The Aura Office no longer plays any part in the protection of Harry Potter. Those closest to him believe we have infiltrated the Ministry.
Well, they got that right then, haven't they?
The book goes into a little bit more detail here, as Snape explains that Dawlish was likely put under a confundus charm by one of the Order members to leak this false trail to Voldemort's spies within the Ministry, and clearly Yaxley fell for it. Of course, Snape has to give Voldemort the correct date to keep his cover. Unbeknownst to Voldemort, though, Snape has also taken measures to ensure Harry's safety, though the movie never reveals this. Following this, the Death Eaters then discuss their covert takeover of the Ministry. Apparently, Yaxley has been using his position within the Ministry to quietly place Scrimgeour's people under the Imperius Curse. The most recent one, as he announces at this meeting, being Pius Thickness, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This was a big one, as someone in that position has regular contact with all of the department heads and can bewitch even more of them to join. The movie simplified this by making Thickness seemingly just a straight-up Death Eater rather than under the Imperius curse, and actually making him present at this meeting. Voldemort then begins talking about his past encounters with Harry Potter and how the boy has always escaped from him. He now knows from interrogating the captured Ollivander about the shared core between his and Harry's wand and what that means.
I face an unfortunate complication. That my wand and Potter's share the same core. They are, in some ways, twins. We can wound, but not fatally harm one another.
Of course, he takes Lucius Malfoy's wand. At this point, the Malfoys are somewhat disgraced among the Death Eaters, as Lucius failed his mission to retrieve the prophecy, and Draco failed to kill Dumbledore. Not to mention, Lucius accidentally got one of the Horcruxes destroyed, so Voldemort was already pretty pissed at him over that. The body acting from the three Malfoys in this scene is really good. It's quite clear that none of them are happy with the current situation or having Voldemort in their house. Voldemort then draws their attention to the floating figure of Charity Burbage, the Muggle Studies teacher at Hogwarts, who's been floating above the table throughout the meeting.
Severus, please. We're friends.
This moment is really hard to watch. I'd argue even more so in the movie, with her calling Snape a friend. It must be extra hard for Snape, too. In order to keep his cover, not only does he have to watch one of his colleagues, who he's known for 16 years, die, but he has to pretend to be completely indifferent while she's begging him for help. So yeah, all in all, this scene was done really well. We then catch up with Harry in his bedroom at Privet Drive. In the book, we see him going through everything in his trunk, trying to find things that might be useful on his quest for the Horcruxes, and when we first see him, his finger is bleeding thanks to a jagged piece of glass he found. This is a piece of the two-way mirror Sirius gave him in Order of the Phoenix, and will play a very important part in this book. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in my Order of the Phoenix video, it was cut from that movie, and therefore comes completely out of nowhere in this one. What is this random bit of glass Harry's holding, and why does some Dumbledore-looking dude sometimes appear in it? There's also a brief moment where Harry steps on a cup of tea sitting outside his bedroom door and thinks it was a prank played by Dudley. As we later learn, though, it was actually a genuinely nice gesture from Dudley. Harry then reads an obituary for Dumbledore in the Daily Prophet, one that he's read several times by now, written by Order of the Phoenix member Elphias Doge. As I mentioned earlier, his is the first of four main perspectives we'll get on Albus Dumbledore. He goes over his life with Albus, who he knew since they were both 10, and talks about his father's arrest, his mother and sister's deaths, and his estrangement from his brother, as well as his many accomplishments and his memories of him as children. This is our first time learning most of this stuff as well. However, as we will later learn, this account of Dumbledore's life is significantly cleaner than the truth, as Doge doesn't know the context behind a lot of this, and there were long stretches of time during which he had little contact with Albus. He confesses that he doesn't know the circumstances behind Albus's father's arrest, assuming he was simply a Muggle hater like so many were back then, and seeing Albus as all the more admirable for not following his father's beliefs. He mentions that he and Albus had been planning a trip around the world, but it was on the eve of that trip that Albus's mother died, so Doge had to go alone while Albus stayed back to care for his siblings. As such, there was a long and significant part of Albus's life that Doge never knew about, including his friendship with Grindelwald. The only mention of Grindelwald Doge makes in the article is in the context of his and Dumbledore's famous duel, where Dumbledore brought him down. Because of this, he had no knowledge of the circumstances of Ariana's death and assumes that Dumbledore was blaming himself for something that was not his fault. It kinda was, though. Doge also talks about Aberforth and how he was much more of a brawler than a thinker like Albus, and how they got along well despite these differences, until Ariana died and they became estranged. Of course, he doesn't know the circumstances behind that. In general, the obituary is positively glowing, emphasizing all of Dumbledore's positive traits and great accomplishments, and not mentioning the darker parts of his life because Doge didn't know about them. Doge only knew Dumbledore at his best, and as such, he views him through rose-tinted glasses. And since that's generally the way we've looked at Dumbledore up until now, it makes sense for this to be the first perspective on his past that we're exposed to, before our perception of the headmaster is challenged later. The book also gives us insight into Harry's feelings on all this. He had thought he knew Dumbledore quite well, but ever since reading this obituary, he had been forced to recognize that he had barely known him at all. Never once had he imagined Dumbledore's childhood or youth. It was as though he had sprung into being as Harry had known him, venerable and silver-haired and old. The idea of a teenage Dumbledore was simply odd, like trying to imagine a stupid Hermione or a friendly blast-ended Scrooge. He had never thought to ask Dumbledore about his past. No doubt it would have felt strange, impertinent even, but after all, it had been common knowledge that Dumbledore had taken part in that legendary duel with Grindelwald, and Harry had not thought to ask Dumbledore what that had been like, nor about any of his other famous achievements. No, they had always discussed Harry, Harry's past, Harry's future, Harry's plans. And it seemed to Harry now, despite the fact that his future was so dangerous and so uncertain, that he had missed irreplaceable opportunities when he had failed to ask Dumbledore more about himself. However, Harry then notices another news article from today's paper. It's an interview with Rita Skeeter about a book on Dumbledore she's written, titled The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. This is the second perspective on Dumbledore we get. She doesn't say much here, but she does heavily imply that Dumbledore wasn't the man everyone believes, suggesting that he dabbled in the dark arts in his youth, and maybe even had anti-Muggle leanings. She also makes hints about Grindelwald. She doesn't mention his and Dumbledore's friendship, not wanting to spoil her yet-to-be-published book, but she does hint that their fight may not have been the epic duel everyone thinks it was. Her source for all of this, as we later learn, is the famous historian Bathilda Bagshot, who knew Dumbledore well in his youth. Of course, given that it's Rita Skeeter, it's easy for us and Harry to dismiss everything she's saying at this point, and certainly some of it probably is made up, or at the very least jumping to conclusions, just to make Dumbledore look worse. For example, one of Dumbledore's most famous achievements was the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood. Rita implies he may only have discovered 4, with the other 8 being plagiarized off another wizard's discovery. In this case, it seems likely that wizard was lying to take credit for Dumbledore's discovery. There are even some things she says that are just blatant lies, like claiming she and Harry have developed a close bond. No, Harry can't stand you, you bitch. She even insinuates that Harry may have been involved in Dumbledore's death, noting how he was the only witness to it, was seen heading down from the tower afterwards, and accused Snape, someone he has a huge grudge against. So, yeah, it's pretty easy to write off everything she says as lies and slander. Not all of it is, though. Things like him dabbling in the dark arts in his youth and disliking Muggles, as we later learn, are true. As Harry is fuming about this article, he briefly and suddenly sees Dumbledore's blue eye appear in the mirror fragment, but thinks he was imagining it because he was reading about Dumbledore. He's not, of course. This is actually Aberforth keeping an eye over him. Nevertheless, Harry decides to pack the mirror fragment with the other things he'll be taking on his journey. Thank God. We then come to the Dursleys' departure from Privet Drive. Now, I mentioned during that montage that I would talk about this. The Dursleys, as I've said, got the short end of the stick in the later movies, and nowhere is that more clear than in this one. We don't even get to see Harry say goodbye to them or any kind of interaction at all. This was one of my biggest disappointments with the movie, as it robs us of any sort of closure with these characters who, while not major characters, have been around since the beginning. Their departure was one of my favorite parts in the book, too. As we learn, Arthur Weasley and Kingsley Shacklebolt had shown up at the Dursleys to offer them protection once the magic protecting the house wears off, which it will when Harry turns 17, as the Death Eaters will likely come to torture and kill them for information on Harry. The Order is sure Voldemort will target you, whether to torture you to try and find out where I am, or because he thinks that by holding you hostage I'd come and try to rescue you. Uncle Vernon's and Harry's eyes met, and Harry was sure that in that instant they were both wondering the same thing. As such, the three of them have been spending a lot of time packing, so they'll be ready to leave by the time the Death Eaters come looking for them. Unfortunately, Vernon, being the stubborn, cynical jackass he is, keeps going back and forth on whether he believes it or not. And now he seems to believe that the whole thing is a trick to get them out so that Harry can get the house. Just in case you've forgotten, I've already got a house. My godfather left me one. So why would I want this one? All the happy memories? There was silence. Harry thought he had rather impressed his uncle with this argument. Harry does eventually manage to convince them that it's the truth, though Vernon wants to know why the Ministry of Magic can't protect them instead. Harry laughed. He could not help himself. It was so very typical of his uncle to put his hopes in the establishment, even within this world that he despised and mistrusted. Harry responds that they think the Ministry has been infiltrated. Vernon even asks why Kingsley can't be the one to protect them, as they apparently trust him more than other wizards. The Dursleys had spotted Kingsley on the news, walking along discreetly behind the Muggle Prime Minister as he visited a hospital. This, and the fact that Kingsley had mastered the knack of dressing like a Muggle, not to mention a certain reassuring something in his slow, deep voice, had caused the Dursleys to take to Kingsley in a way that they had certainly not done with any other wizard. Although it was true that they had never seen him with his earring in. Ultimately, it's when Harry mentions that Voldemort has Dementors on his side that Dudley speaks up and tells his parents he's going with the Order, and this settles the argument. It's the first time we've seen Dudley stand up to his parents. Later, Order of the Phoenix members Daedalus Diggle and Hestia Jones arrive, as they're going to be the ones to look after the Dursleys. They explain the plan to them, and also inform Harry that the plan to get him out of Privet Drive, which was for Moody to apparate with him, isn't an option anymore, and that Moody will explain the new plan when he arrives. The two of them are about to go out to give Harry time to say goodbye to the Dursleys, but this is rendered unnecessary when Vernon gives a very loud and awkward goodbye. He swung his right arm upwards to shake Harry's hand, but at the last moment seemed unable to face it and merely closed his fist and began swinging it backwards and forwards like a metronome. Yeah, sounds about what I expected from him. Dudley, on the other hand, proving himself more mature than either of his parents, actually seems concerned about Harry, wondering why he's not coming into hiding as well. Hestia is outraged that the Dursleys don't know where Harry is going, and Harry tells her that they think he's a waste of space, to which Dudley replies, "I don't think you're a waste of space." Harry is shocked and touched by this, and realizes that the tea Dudley left outside his room wasn't a prank after all. Petunia, of course, is overcome with emotion and tearfully hugs Dudley, so proud of him for saying thank you, even though, as Hestia points out, he didn't really say thank you. Before they all leave, Dudley comes over to Harry to shake his hand, and the two of them say goodbye. Then he walks out after Vernon and the two wizards, leaving Petunia the last one in the house with Harry. She and Harry say goodbye, and for a second she looks like she wants to say something, but can't seem to bring herself to do so and leaves. So yeah, as I said, I love this part of the book. Not giving these characters this closure was a big mistake in the movies, and it especially sucks because it was filmed. There are 2 deleted scenes that would have given a sense of closure for them. One of them is the goodbye between Harry and Dudley, which I'll admit comes across a bit awkward, but it still would have been better than nothing.
I don't think you're a waste of space.
Thanks. See you, Big D.
I do love the way Dudley looks his father dead in the eye as he ignores his command and walks over to Harry. That was cool. The other deleted scene here is a moment between Harry and Petunia that wasn't in the book at all.
I have lived in this house for 20 years. And now in a single night I'm expected to leave.
They'll torture you. If they think for a moment you know where I'm going, they'll stop at nothing.
Do you think I don't know what they're capable of? You didn't just lose a mother that night in Godric's Hollow, you know. I lost foster-sister.
I like seeing Petunia open up like this and show that deep down she was sad when her sister died and hasn't forgotten it. Both of these scenes really should have been kept in, and it's not like it would have added much to the runtime. I also just like seeing both in the book and these deleted scenes that as awful as the Dursleys were to Harry, he still doesn't want to see them get killed. So the Dursleys leave and Harry is left alone in the house. He's surprisingly sentimental about leaving. Not sad necessarily, but definitely nostalgic about the few good times he had here. I'd say more so in the book than in the movie, where he says a lot of it out loud to Hedwig, who's kind of pissed at him for keeping her in her cage. Soon enough, 13 Order members arrive at the house. Ron, Hermione, Hagrid, Fred, George, Mr. Weasley, Bill, Fleur, Lupin, Tonks, Moody, Kingsley, and Mundungus. Harry is surprised to see so many of them, but Moody quickly explains why. Their original plan of having him simply apparate Harry to the Burrow won't work anymore. Since Pius Thickness was placed under the Imperius Curse, he's made it illegal to apparate in or out of Privet Drive, place a portkey there, or connect it to the Flu Network. And since Harry is still underage, no one can cast a spell to get him out, or they'll be detected by the trace.
Potter, you're underage, which means you've still got the trace on you.
What's the trace?
If you sneeze, the Ministry will know who wipes your nose. The point is, we have to use those means of transport the trace can't detect. Brooms, Thestrals, and the like. We'll go in pairs.
The plan is for half of the people there to turn into Harry using Polyjuice Potion, and for each one to ride with a protector. This way, the Death Eaters won't know which Harry is the real one. Moody also mentions how they leaked a false trail to the Ministry about the date of the departure, but as we know from that Death Eater meeting, they do know the real date. Now, one thing the movie doesn't explain is that each of them are heading for a different safe house where a portkey is placed, and they'll use those portkeys to get to the Burrow. That way, the Death Eaters won't know where they've all gone. The reason I bring this up is because in the movie, Harry and Hagrid go straight to the Burrow, whereas in the book, they first go to Tonks' parents' house where they take a portkey. Anyway, Harry, being the noble idiot he is very much against this plan.
If you think I'm going to let everyone risk their lives for me...
I've never done that before, have I?
Ultimately, he's talked into it, of course, and Ron, Hermione, the twins, Fleur, and Mundungus all take Polyjuice Potion to turn into Harry. I love the way the movie does this part. Seeing Daniel Radcliffe acting as each of these different characters is really funny.
Wow, we're identical. Haven't got anything a bit more sporting, have you?
Yeah, I don't really fancy this colour.
I fancy this. You're not you, so shut it and strip. All right, all right.
Bill, look away. I'm hideous.
I knew she was lying about that tattoo.
Harry, your eyesight really is awful.
Before I move on, I would like to talk about some smaller things in this scene. First of all, in both versions, I find this line from Kingsley low-key hilarious.
Kingsley, I thought you were looking after the Prime Minister.
You are more important.
Wow, Harry's more important than the Prime Minister. We also learn that Lupin and Tonks have gotten married. I'm not gonna lie, as soon as I read this, I might have subconsciously spotted the death flags for both of them. In the movie, of course, they already seem to be together in the last one, and there's just a brief mention of their marriage here before Moody interrupts.
Wait till you hear the news. Remus and
All right, we'll have time for a cozy catch-up later.
Speaking of which, there are several other things in the movie version of this scene that are rushed or out of nowhere. For example, this is our first time meeting both Bill and Mundungus in the movies. In the case of Mundungus, it works alright, and we do get a general idea of his shady, untrustworthy character, which is all that's really important here. Bill, on the other hand, is a different matter. This is another Weasley sibling that we've never even heard of before, and he just pops up out of nowhere. And he's in a relationship with Fleur, who we haven't seen since the Goblet of Fire movie, and is suddenly back without any sort of reintroduction. Bill also briefly mentions the attack on him by Greyback.
I was also a werewolf named Greyback. I hope to repay the favour one day.
Since he never really does get revenge on Greyback in either version, I feel like they didn't really need to mention that attack in the movie, though. Incidentally, Bill is played by Domhnall Gleeson, who would later play Hux in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and is the son of Brendan Gleeson, who plays Moody. I wonder what that was like for him, acting alongside his dad here. Speaking of which, Moody is great in this scene. Since this is the last time we'll see him, it seems like the movie really wanted to make the most of it.
You're looking fit. Yeah, he's absolutely gorgeous. I'd say we get undercover before someone murders him. For those of you who haven't taken Polyjuice Potion before, fair warning. Tastes like goblin piss.
I have lots of experiences with that, dear Maddo.
Yes, it's all very touching. Let's go!
Circling back a bit though, what we see in this scene with Bill, Fleur, Lupin, and Tonks is I think a bit of a general problem with these later movies. Because of how much plot relevant stuff needed to be crammed into them, as well as just the sheer amount of characters, they just don't have time to develop a lot of them as much as the books do. And as a result, end up rushing a lot of these character moments so we don't really get to know them well enough. I mean, at least in Lupin's case, we did get to know him back in Prisoner of Azkaban, but Tonks, Bill, and Fleur, among others, definitely suffer from this. And even Lupin's role in the later films is distinctly less prominent and interesting than in the books. This is why I think remaking this as a TV series would be a really good idea. It would give a lot more time for the things the movies couldn't fit in, and they could even focus a bit on things the books didn't really cover. But moving on, the group split into their pairs, Harry and Hagrid on the motorbike, Fred and his dad, George and Lupin, Ron and Tonks, and Mundungus and Moody all on brooms, and Hermione and Kingsley and Fleur and Bill on thestrals. They deliberately chose not to put Harry on a broom, as they think Snape will have told the Death Eaters about his flying skills, and thus they'll be expecting him to be on a broom. They all set off, and are immediately set upon by Death Eaters, who pursue the different pairs as they split up. Harry, of course, wants to turn back to help the others, but Hagrid refuses. His job is to get Harry to safety, after all. The movie spiced the chase up a little by having them fly through traffic, which I get is more visually interesting than having it all take place in the air. Though they're not exactly being subtle around all these muggles, are they? One thing I think is better in the movie than in the book is Hedwig's death. In the book, she's just hit with a killing curse while in her cage and dies. In the movie, Harry let her out before they set off, and she actually saves Harry from one of the Death Eaters before she's killed. I don't think I even need to say why I like this better. Some cool things happen in the book during the chase, like we see a lot of weird and cool things the motorbike can do, like producing a solid brick wall behind it, shooting a net out behind it, and producing dragon fire from its exhaust, propelling it forward incredibly fast. Unfortunately, the force of this causes the handle for Harry's sidecar to splinter, and Hagrid tries to use magic to repair it, but being kind of, well, bad at magic, he ends up breaking it instead. Harry uses Wingardium Leviosa to levitate it, and Hagrid pulls him onto the bike, as Harry uses magic to blow up the sidecar in the Death Eaters' faces. The most important thing that happens here, however, is that one of the Death Eaters' masks slipped off, revealing them to be Stan Shunpike. Now obviously Stan's not a Death Eater, he's under the Imperius curse, so Harry uses Expelliarmus to disarm him rather than do anything that might make him fall off his broom. Unfortunately, this is the act that causes the other Death Eaters to realize he's the real Harry and inform Voldemort. As Lupin explains later, having seen Harry use Expelliarmus to defend himself in the graveyard, which was a very unusual move, the Death Eaters now think it's his signature spell. I kind of love how Snape was the one who taught Harry the spell that would become his signature move. Since this doesn't happen in the movie, it's simply explained that Hedwig protecting Harry is what gave him away.
What gave you away?
Hedwig, I think. She was trying to protect me.
Which I guess makes sense too. So of course Voldemort arrives, not on a broom or anything, but just flying on his own. He attempts to kill Harry, whose wand suddenly acts on its own and shoots golden flames, something Harry's not capable of, at Voldemort, shattering Lucius Malfoy's wand in his hand. The reason for this, as Dumbledore later explains in Limbo, is because after Harry and Voldemort's wands connected in the graveyard and Harry's won, it imbibed some qualities of Voldemort's wand. So, the wand recognized him here and fired some of his own magic against him. In the book, while all of this is happening, Hagrid is not unconscious as he is in the movie. He's wide awake and launches himself off the motorbike, tackling one of the Death Eaters that was about to kill Harry and causing both of them to fall to the ground. After the wand shatters, Voldemort orders one of the Death Eaters there, Selwyn, to give him his wand, and Harry uses the Dragonfire button to launch away from him, and uses a summoning charm to pull himself towards wherever Hagrid is. Thankfully, just as Voldemort is about to try to kill him again with Selwyn's wand, Harry enters the protective enchantments around Tonks' parents' house, their destination, where he crashes the motorbike and falls unconscious. Harry awakes to find himself in the Tonks' house. He meets Tonks' father, Ted, who was shocked to hear that the Death Eaters knew the date of Harry's departure. To Harry's immense relief, Hagrid walks in, having been nursed back to health by Tonks' mother, Andromeda, who, if you remember, is Bellatrix and Narcissa's sister. In fact, Harry initially mistakes her for Bellatrix and reaches for his wand. So Harry and Hagrid take the portkey to the Burrow, with Harry promising the Tonkses that he'll have their daughter contact them once he knows she's fine. They arrive at the Burrow, where of course Mrs. Weasley and Ginny rush to greet them. Though relieved to find them safe, everyone is naturally worried that no one else is back. Ron and Tonks' portkey arrived without them, as did Fred and Mr. Weasley's. Lupin does arrive shortly, though, supporting George, who's lost an ear, and like in the movie, as soon as they get George onto the couch, Lupin immediately starts interrogating Harry.
We've been betrayed. Voldemort knew you were being moved tonight. I had to make sure you weren't an imposter.
Now, the movies never actually give us an answer to this. How did the Death Eaters know the date of Harry's departure? In the book, when Bill later tells them about how Mundungus disapparated when he saw Voldemort, they wondered if Mundungus betrayed them, but as Bill points out, he can't have, because strangely, despite knowing the date, the Death Eaters didn't seem to be expecting the whole multiple Harrys thing. And according to Bill, that was actually Mundungus's idea. So how is it that they knew the date, but not the full plan? Fleur comes up with what seems like the most plausible answer, that they weren't betrayed, but someone was simply careless and let the date slip by accident. The actual explanation is quite a bit more complicated, and we actually learn about it in Snape's memories at the end of the book. Dumbledore's portrait in the headmaster's office told Snape to give Voldemort the correct date so as not to raise suspicion of his true loyalties. However, he also told Snape to plant the idea of decoy Harrys. So Snape used a confundus charm on Mundungus and made him present the decoy plan to the Order as his own idea. None of this was ever explained in the movie. I wouldn't mind this so much except that they clearly set it up as a mystery here, one that will never be resolved. I'd guess a lot of non-readers simply assume Mundungus betrayed them, but no, he's not a traitor, just a coward. So anyway, Lupin clears Harry of suspicion and doesn't bother interrogating Hagrid since he's half giant, so Polyjuice Potion wouldn't work for turning into him. In the book, Lupin wonders what gave Harry away, and Harry recounts how he saw Stan Shunpike, causing Lupin to realize that it was the use of Expelliarmus that gave Harry away. Lupin actually tells Harry off for this.
Harry, the time for disarming is past. These people are trying to capture and kill you. At least stun if you aren't prepared to kill. The Death Eaters, frankly most people, would have expected you to attack back. Expelliarmus is a useful spell, Harry, but the Death Eaters seem to think it is your signature move, and I urge you not to let it become so.
Harry's pretty defiant here, though, and I think rightfully so. As he points out, Stan isn't acting of his own accord, and any other spell he used on him would have caused him to fall to his death.
I won't blast people out of the way just because they're there. That's Voldemort's job.
Kingsley then arrives with Hermione, and he and Lupin interrogate each other.
The last words Albus Dumbledore spoke to the pair of us.
Harry is the best hope we have. Trust him.
From here, the movie kind of speeds through the rest of the characters returning, which I think is fine. We still get to see Tonks praising Ron.
Deserves that. Brilliant he was. I wouldn't be standing here without him.
Really?
Why is it so a surprise?
And of course, George making a joke about his missing ear.
How are you feeling, Georgie?
Saint-like.
Come again?
Saint-like. I'm holy. I'm holy, Fred. You get it?
The whole wide world of ear-related humour, and you go for I'm holy. It's pathetic.
Reckon I'm still better looking than you.
So Bill and Fleur are the last ones to arrive, and they give a devastating announcement.
Mad Eye's dead.
Needless to say, this greatly shocks and upsets all of the characters.
Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Harry felt as though something inside him was falling through the earth, leaving him forever.
I know I was really upset when I read this because he was one of my favorite characters, and even in the books, I never felt like we saw enough of him. I mean, he wasn't in Half-Blood Prince at all, and the only book he was especially prominent in, it wasn't even really him. And of course, Brendan Gleeson's portrayal of him just made me love him even more. So needless to say, I was kind of in denial when I read this and making excuses for how he could still be alive. Still, it makes sense to kill him off here. It shows that even the strongest aren't safe.
Harry could not quite comprehend it. Mad-Eye dead. It could not be. Mad-Eye, so tough, so brave, the consummate survivor.
Harry has lost yet another protector, and the Order has now lost, effectively, its 2 leaders within the span of months. His death also sets the precedent that people are going to be dying throughout this book, whereas in the other ones, the major deaths were always at the very end. We can already see that this one will be significantly darker. I also have to give Rowling credit for completely defying the no body, no death rule. Usually in fiction, if you don't see the character die or their body, they aren't dead. Not the case here. We don't see Moody die, yet there seems to be very little doubt he really is dead. I do feel like the movie glosses over his death a little too much. I get that they had limited time, but they could have shown more of the characters reacting to his death. I already mentioned Harry's feelings, but in the book we also see how much it upsets Tonks. I mean, he was her mentor, so of course she's going to take his death hard. She does point out, though, that he knew what he was getting into. He knew Voldemort was likely to go after him first since he was the strongest, and therefore most likely to be the one protecting the real Harry. In other words, he was totally ready to die for this. By the way, I'm glad that it wasn't some Death Eater who killed Moody. I love that it took Voldemort himself to kill him. In the book, we also hear from several of the others how the fight went for them. Of course, Bill and Fleur saw Voldemort kill Moody after Mundungus fled in panic. We also hear from Hermione and Kingsley that they saw Voldemort as well. Since Kingsley is the second strongest after Moody, he would naturally be the second one Voldemort would go for. He only stopped going after them when the Death Eaters called him after Harry gave himself away. They also apparently saw the Death Eater Travers, who's supposed to be in Azkaban. Evidently, there's been a mass breakout. Apparently, Tonks narrowly escaped Bellatrix, who was trying real hard to kill her, though she did manage to injure Bellatrix's husband, Rodolphus. And Lupin reveals that Snape was the one who cut George's ear off using Sectum Sempra. This was never stated in the movie, and I guess I get why. It basically just functions as yet more proof of Snape's villainy, as if we needed more at this point. As we learn in his memories at the end of the book, he was actually aiming at a Death Eater who was about to attack Lupin, but missed. But moving on, in the book, after they all theorize about how the Death Eaters knew the date, Harry emphasizes his trust in all of them, refusing to believe any of them would betray him. This causes Lupin to look at Harry with what's described as a pitying expression.
Do you think I'm a fool? No, I think you're like James, who would have regarded it as the height of dishonor to mistrust his friends. I see Lupin's point here, but I do think there's a line between blindly trusting your friends and just assuming the worst. Lupin and Bill then leave to find Moody's body. Harry wants to leave too, believing the others are all in danger as long as he's there. They all refuse to let him, of course, reminding him that the whole point of tonight was to get him here. The movie has its own version of this scene, where Harry tries to leave quietly but is stopped by Ron.
Going somewhere?
Nobody else is going to die. Not for me.
For you? You think Mad-Eye died for you? You think George took that curse for you? You may be the chosen one, mate, but this is a whole lot bigger than that. It's always been bigger than that.
I think I like this version better. It's a good moment for Ron, who, as I've mentioned, often got the short end of the stick in the movies. Though he does say,
"Still got the wedding?" Which
is a bit weird considering there's been no mention of a wedding yet in this or the last movie. That aside though, I really like this scene. In the book, Harry tells the others about how his wand acted on its own against Voldemort. None of them believe him, though, thinking Harry must have simply acted instinctively and was able to use magic he never had before due to the pressure of the situation. It's interesting in hindsight how even Hermione and adult wizards like Mr. Weasley don't fully know how wands work. I guess it's not an often studied aspect of magic. Later, Harry's scar starts burning, and the old connection between him and Voldemort opens up again as he sees Voldemort torturing Ollivander, who seems to have no answer to what happened that caused Harry's wand to act on its own and destroy Lucius's. When Harry tells Ron and Hermione what he saw, Hermione is terrified as that connection was supposed to have stopped, and tells Harry he needs to close his mind. This is actually an ongoing thing throughout the book. As Harry has visions through Voldemort's eyes, Hermione keeps insisting that he close himself off to them. Harry, though, prefers to use them to his advantage, and ultimately that turns out to be the best thing to do. Even in the end, Hermione realizes this and persuades Harry to look into Voldemort's thoughts. It's one of those rare occasions where she actually turns out to be wrong, which of course means it wasn't in the movie.